Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, the number of dead and infected continues to rise in the fight against Ebola. But as myths and misinformation spread quickly, how can the disease be contained? So do you remember the last time we did an Ebola show? It was about 3 months ago. That was back in July. Our digital producer Malika Balawi is looking out for your live feedback. Right. What are you seeing? What do people want to know right now?
Well, there are still misconceptions swirling around, and one of the most persistent ones I'd like to tackle head on right here.
Okay.
Nicole tweets in, people think that Ebola spreads through the air, which is actually a misconception, but considering the death toll, even I am skeptical, he says. So we have an answer via this tweet from the White House in the US. You can't get Ebola through air. You can't get Ebola through water. Of course, this is a live conversation, so we will unpack these misconceptions, and we want you to tweet in using hashtag AJStream.
So before we get that conversation started, do you know how easy it is to be part of this show? It is super easy. You can message us on Facebook, on Twitter here, Google+, even Instagram, and you too could find yourself in the stream. Now here are some of the other stories we're following. Salt water and condensed milk can cure Ebola. It's an airborne virus that liquefies your organs. These are just a couple of the myths that health officials are struggling to combat as misinformation surrounding the epidemic continues, spreading faster than the virus itself. Here are some of the others that Al Jazeera Plus put together. Now, what's making the situation more difficult for those fighting the outbreak is that survivors and relatives of victims are often ostracized, given little chance to reintegrate back to educate their communities. And this also includes some of the 3,700 children who have been orphaned by the disease. And now the World Health Organization estimates that 8,000 confirmed cases and more than 3,800 deaths. So today, we'll look at the struggles facing those combating Ebola and answer some of the questions that many still have about the disease. So joining us via Skype to discuss this, Deconti Kofa is founder and executive director of the Kofa Foundation. Her husband, Patrick Sawyer, was the first American to die from Ebola in this current outbreak. Talbot Nyenswa is the Assistant Minister of Health for Liberia. And Dr. Ali Khan is Dean of the College of Public Health at the University of Nebraska. He's also a former director at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. So it's good to have you all here in the stream. I wish it was under better circumstances. DeConti, your husband made headline news when he went from Liberia to Nigeria. He got very sick and he died. So condolences, first of all. But what happened? Can you tell us more about how he got sick?
Yeah. You know, I was working on figuring that out along with everybody else.
Really?
Like, I learned the story along with everyone else as it was happening and unfolding. I actually didn't even know Patrick was in Nigeria until Thursday, the day before he died. So on Thursday was when one of my sisters called me and said, hey, do you know if Patrick's in Nigeria? No, she said, do you know where Patrick is? And I said, well, yeah, he's in Liberia. You know, she said, well, do you know if he took a trip for work to Nigeria? And I said, well, that's quite possible because he travels a lot. for his job. I mean, he worked for the ECOWAS unit.
Yeah.
In Liberia, he was the lead of ECOWAS unit.
And that's an economic group that's puts together West African countries. But what did he do? Was he a consultant?
He was the lead. He was the lead
Yeah.
of the unit.
Wow.
He was the head of the ECOWAS unit in Liberia.
Right.
So I wasn't surprised that he was in Nigeria, when she said it, even though I hadn't spoken with him personally, because he, at a drop of a dime, he was somewhere to serve in his country. And
did you know he was ill? Did he like email you or Skype you? He was like, darling, I'm feeling a bit sick. What did you know about how ill he was?
No, I didn't know he was ill at all. And Patrick's the kind of person in the past, many times, he won't tell me when he was ill until after he was feeling better, because he would always say, I don't want you to worry. I don't want to burden you. You're with the children. We have 3 young children, 6, 5, and 18 months old.
Yeah.
And he kind of felt guilty. There was that guilt that he had that, he felt like, oh, she's there alone with the kids. And so in his own little way, which pissed me off, quite frankly, he won't tell me, when he was sick or if something was wrong, because he didn't want me to worry.
Wow. Okay, so the first you heard about Patrick being sick was actually knowing that he had died.
Was knowing that he was quarantined.
Wow.
So was the Thursday, the day before he died. So I got to know he was sick one day before he died. Before I could get the prayers out the door, he was dead the next day.
Wow. Okay, Talbot, we spoke to you very close to when this happened to Patrick, when Patrick passed. This was back in July. What's happening in Liberia right now? How are people faring?
I think there's some sense of relief, especially if you compare 2 months back. If we talk about the months of August and September and know what's going on right now, you'll notice that there's some sense of relief with the scale up of interventions that will lead towards reducing the transmission of the virus.
So what's that mean? So Talbot, what's that mean if I actually live in Liberia? Because I was seeing scenes where people were actually just lying on the ground being left to die, and there weren't enough hospital beds. So what does it mean when you're saying things are getting better? How are they getting better?
I think it was some 3 weeks ago, the scenario you're describing, but right now, some of our treatment units, you have bed space. If you look at ELW 3, which is one of the treatment units we have here that is being run by MSF, you find out that there's bed space right now for these people. We opened a new center called the Island Clinic Center that have 150 beds. And so interventions have been scaled out, more treatment units being built. We're adding up additional beds to get people into Ebola treatment units. But before I go there, Patrick Sawyer was a very, very good friend of mine. We worked on the Ebola situation when it first started in March and April. He was very much instrumental. And he and myself used to exercise on our national football stadium. So I knew him very well as a close friend. So let me extend
Thomas, everybody,
my deepest sympathies to her.
So everybody's wondering how, if Patrick was sick and he died a day after he reached Nigeria, how was he even able to get on a plane? You already knew that there was an outbreak in Liberia of Ebola right then. Why was he able to get on a plane?
He didn't die the day after he got on the plane. He got there on Sunday. I found out.
Yeah.
He died the day after I found out.
Okay.
But
gotcha.
I found out that he died. He got there on Sunday.
Yeah.
Then Friday was when he died. So, but still, your question's really valid.
Femi, compounding all of this online, we're seeing thoughts with those who are left behind after the deaths, and especially the children. So there's a tweet here from Qais who says the special concern is for the thousands of children whose parents have died from the illness. We also got a video comment from a photojournalist who just returned from Sierra Leone and Liberia. Tolbert, have a listen to what Neil has to say.
A family, a young girl who was 16 and lost both of her parents and now is the sole breadwinner for her 3 younger brothers and sisters. And without support from the community and with this huge stigma attached, there's not many options for her. to get the support that she's going to need.
So Tolbert, he talks about the support she needs, but where will she even go to get that?
No, we have the World Food Program and the government of Liberia together giving psychosocial support, and this includes food rations for people who lost their life or orphans. We have foster homes. This morning, I even put together a group of organizations that on psychosocial support program to do a national strategic plan that will take care of these kids that lost their parents or people who came from the ETU, Ebola treatment unit, and got sick and did not leave anything home. So there's a psychosocial program that we're working with UNICEF and other partners to give support. If people are even quarantined,
right,
we take food to them in their home, we give them water, we provide them with support, and they are giving counseling and all that. At the Ebola treatment units, people are also getting support.
DeConte, what did you want to add?
Yes, I was going to say that I'm very excited to hear that, Mr. Talbert, because that's what the COFA Foundation is about. We are fully committed to those who are left behind. People like myself and my daughters who are left behind to pick up the pieces, to deal with the ostracism, to deal with just that loss, that grief. You know, I'm so excited to hear you mention counseling, because that's a piece that's not being addressed. And we all know in our community in Liberia, mental health is still very much a taboo issue. And so those are barriers within itself we're going to need to overcome before. But definitely I would like us to connect, you know, following the show so that we can share resources. And the COFA Foundation is committed to people like that young girl who is now the breadwinner for herself and her 3 siblings. We have fundings that we can assist with some of those things.
Doctor, when you're listening to this conversation, you know exactly what's going on through Guinea, Sierra Leone, also Liberia, and then the cases that are popping up in other places around the world. This is a disease that you've dealt with before, back in the 90s. Could I ask, has something gone wrong in the way it's been dealt when you're looking at this?
So thank you for that. Yeah, let me make a couple of points. And you're right. Currently, what it looks like is that the epidemic is outpacing the response. So I'm encouraged when I hear the minister say that things are looking up there. And again, my condolences to Ms. Kofa for her loss. Her loss is compounded by the loss of additional approximately 4,000 people who have had this tragic disease. And there's no doubt that what we're seeing here is very different. So in the past, we used to associate Ebola with sort of Uganda and Central Africa, Zaire and Gabon, etc. This is the first outbreak that we're seeing happening in West Africa, and we're seeing this outbreak happening in large metropolitan areas. We're also seeing it happening in a certain part of the forested areas. So this outbreak is categorically different from other outbreaks we've seen, and it's nice to see that at this point it looks like the global response is really going to recognize this not as a routine Ebola outbreak that we've been very effective at controlling and preventing in the past, but being very different and requiring a categorically different response to help these people in West Africa.
Yeah, and we can't sugarcoat it.
Right, to add to that, it is a really challenging outbreak because to have Ebola in an urban area like this, cross the characteristic of this Ebola crisis, hitting 3 countries, borders, across borders, highly urban population. So what we're doing here is, as we move along, we are even developing strategies that we deal with this situation, strategies that are never on the book before to go by and say, this is what you need to do. Because I had the government of Liberia incident management system for Ebola response. And right now we're having community care center strategy that's being developed so that we get more people into care and give support to them and reduce the secondary transmission of the virus. This strategy did not exist before. And so this is a huge challenging Ebola situation, getting more laboratory in the country to do fast testing, people dying in communities. We have to train barrier team to promote safe barriers, organize more teams to get people from the community. So there have to be a combination of strategies that have to go along, and the interventions have to be robust. We used to see Ebola virus disease that occurred in rural areas, very small rural communities. To contain it was very easy. But now you have huge population outbreak of a disease in more than 1 million population. So this is very strange. You have to design as you do. And so
you're working it out as you're going along, Tolbert. Take a breath for a moment, because the community wants to jump in.
Right. Well, Tolbert mentioned strategies. So, Dr. Khan, on those strategies, people online are saying they're asking questions about them, really, and they're wondering if they're working. So, here in busting some of these myths, Louise tweets in that the first myth is that it's under control, and he links to a Spanish editorial cartoon that says all is under control. There are just a few traces of Ebola. So, Dr. Khan, why has this taken so long to be contained? And of course, it's not contained now. What's the delay?
So I think it's very fair to say that it's not under control until we have 0 cases. And when we have 0 cases, at that point, we can say it's under control. I think the minister was very insightful about the different nature of this outbreak from prior sort of more rural, confined outbreaks in the past, and the fact that in this case we need a categorically different strategy. And it's not just the advances in public health, in healthcare. We're seeing, the improved burial practice, improved practices in healthcare, but it's also about the public health system. So are we making sure we're educating the community on what the risks are from person-to-person transmission? Are we following up on all the cases to help get them into treatment centers? Are we following up on contacts to make sure that if they get sick, we can help them get to a treatment center or place them in quarantine or wherever it needs to get done? So this is really to make sure that we're matching healthcare with public health practices and help prevent and control this outbreak.
Let me just play you a little clip of a health worker in Liberia who contracted Ebola and then lived to actually record this video. Have a listen to how he describes how people treat him.
I am Kotamoni Menu, live in Liberia. I'm a nurse working at the Peaceful Medical Clinic. I contracted this virus from a little child that I was treating, and the child vomited on me. And I went to the Ebola center on 3 different occasions where I was rejected. At the end of the day, they accepted me. When they did my test, I was positive. And after spending 11 days at the Ebola centers, I was safe. And when I was taken in the community, family members were afraid of me, relatives, friends, and brothers were afraid of me in the community.
So this is poor guy. He recovers from Ebola. He tries to get back into his family, his community, and nobody is wanting to be near him because he had Ebola, but he's clear of Ebola right now. Yeah. So, DeConte, how do people treat you with Patrick having passed in such tragic circumstances? How do they treat you? Because you set up a foundation because of the way people were treating you.
Yeah, I set up a foundation. Well, about now, they're pretty clear, I hope, that, I'm still alive and breathing and kicking, so I don't have Ebola. And even prior to that, I hadn't been in touch with Patrick for over a year. Physically. He was, working there, and I was here in the U.S. with our family. And his work kept him away for long stretches of time. But, there are those misconceptions that because you're associated with someone who has Ebola, that you have Ebola. A good friend of mine that helped me with a memorial service that I held in memory of Patrick and all the victims who lost their lives to Ebola, went home feeling sick over the weekend, and her mother thought she caught Ebola from helping me out with the memorial service. So there's a lot of misinformation.
How did the mother convey that to you? How did you get to hear that story?
My friend told me, she said, "Hey Dee, when I got home, I felt really sick, and she said, and my mother said to me, maybe you got Ebola from the service." And she said, so I had to do some education at home.
Wow. Okay. And then people on Facebook are saying stuff to you too, because this foundation is out there. You're very public. What are they saying? Are you getting some pushback?
I am getting some pushback. I am getting a lot of support. I have to state that I'm getting a lot of support. People are reaching out. They're asking, how can I help? What can I do, to help out with the Kofa Foundation and your work? But I'm also getting some pushback. I got someone who told me to go back to Liberia. Why are Liberians here in the U.S. In the first place? And so I had to, normally I've gotten to a point where I don't typically would respond to those kind of things, but I had to give a brief history lesson there,
Right.
especially the question about why are Liberians in the U.S., where I said, well,
That's where they came from.
where we came from. It's
Right.
a welcome home party for us.
Yeah.
If you're telling me to go back home, then throw a party for me because I'm here.
Yeah.
Liberia was founded by free slaves that left America and traveled back to Africa and discovered Liberia there. There were indigenous people living there too, but the slaves that went there, the free people that went there, were directly from the U.S. and they started a government in Liberia. Our very first president,
Sure.
second, third, fourth.
So
all the
DeConte,
way down.
I'm guessing the people who watch Al Jazeera are pretty up on their African history, so we're not going to go through all of it now because I know they want to
Yeah.
ask you guess some more questions. Malika.
Well, I'm dipping back into the community and asking them to share some of the misconceptions they see in their country. Dr. Khan, this is another one. Murtala says lots of folks see Ebola as a death sentence. Another person chimes in, Ebola is not a death sentence. You can survive if you seek care, and we in the health community must rise to meet that need. Could you elaborate on it not being a death sentence?
Correct. So currently what we're seeing is approximately 50% of people who have the disease who die. So this is not a disease we want people to get. We want good public health in place that we don't get any additional infection. So yes, it's not 100%, but 50% is too many. 4,000 dead people in West Africa is 4,000 too many who have died from this disease. And I think it's really sad that we talk about stigmatizing these people because they should be heroes because they've survived the disease. If anything, they can't get reinfected now. So we should be thinking about them as heroes and how they can help communicate in the community about how they survived and how they're protected as they go out into the community now from Ebola.
All right, let me yeah, go ahead, Dee.
I have to say that it's those kind of stigmatizations that even prevent people from even saying when they're feeling ill and when they're infected with the disease, because they don't want to be ostracized.
Sure.
Given, if you have it, you need to get help and you need to isolate yourself. But how do you do so knowing that you're going to get castigated? So we need to address that compassionate piece where we need to show compassion for people no matter what, because we want people to come forth when they're feeling ill and say that they have Ebola. We have a case here where we just lost Mr. Thomas Duncan in Texas.
And that was the Liberian who traveled to Dallas. He went to the hospital, was sent home with antibiotics, went back to the hospital, and then died a few days later.
Died a few days later. So it's questionable whether or not Mr. Duncan knew he had Ebola prior to coming to the U.S. There's debates back and forth on that. There's strong
That's a public. That's a public health strategy.
Yeah.
So I
should have known.
Where I'm going with this is that we need to be more human about this and more compassionate, so that people who do have it will speak up and tell us that they have it, that they're feeling ill, so that they can get the help that they need, so that more people aren't infected by this disease, so that we get it under control.
Sure. All right, guests, I'm just going to ask you to take a pause for a moment. We're almost at the end of this show, but not before I want to show you a little kid called Mamadi. He's from Liberia. Have a look here. He was 11 years old. He was a confirmed Ebola patient. He's now been cleared of Ebola. He's Ebola free. I think it'd be good to just end on something that's a little bit more upbeat and positive. As Talbot was telling us, things are progressing, things are getting better. And Dr. Khan was talking about how different strategies that we actually need to maybe tackle this very, very large Ebola outbreak. I'm going to move away from Mamadi there, very reluctantly. Say thank you very much to our guests, to DeConte, Talbot and Dr. Khan. We will take them to the post show, stream.aljazeera.com. If you haven't had your Ebola question answered yet, Malika is standing by, #AJStream. Let me tell you though about the next show. What would you say if I told you that pretty people earn more money or attractive people are thought to be better leaders? Not an easy thought to digest. We will look at the financing of good looks in the next AJ stream. Hello again, this is the Stream's online post show. We're continuing our conversation on the Ebola virus and struggles facing health officials. So still with us we have DeConte Kofa. She's founder and executive director of the Kofa Foundation, and her husband Patrick Sawyer was the first American to die from Ebola in this current outbreak. And Tolbert Nyenswa is an assistant minister of health for Liberia. Dr. Ali Khan had to go off and do some duty, so we appreciate him being in the main show. But DeConte and Tolbert, Liberians together, I know you can handle this. All right, so this is a tough question. I'm just going to ask both of you this. I don't want to DeConte, you said let's not sugarcoat it. Your husband got on a plane, he was sick. Tolbert, how is that possible that should happen? He was sick with Ebola. We knew at the time there was Ebola in Liberia. How is that possible?
Now, note that this is a disease that having an incubation period of the time of infection and the onset of symptom is between 2 to 21 days. Which
yes, but not the flight from Liberia to Nigeria.
Weeks.
That's just along the coast. He didn't develop symptoms on a plane journey, Tolbert, surely?
No, it's 2 to 3 weeks.
Right.
And at the time he left Liberia, he may not have had symptoms before leaving Liberia, but it is possible that he was incubating the disease and could develop symptoms in about 2 or 3 days of incubation. So that is possible. It's the same case with Thomas Eric Duncan that we're talking about right now. So that's the nature of the
went
disease.
to Dallas and then died afterwards. But the thing is, the Nigerians were actually waiting and were testing people because they knew that there were Ebola outbreaks in the region. They were testing people. Could Patrick just literally walk out of Liberia and onto a plane at the time?
At the time, we did not have the kind of stringent measures that we have in right now with airport testing temperatures and thermometers at the airport to test. At the time, Liberia did not have that sophistication. So we didn't know that whether he was developing temperature or he had fever before he left Liberia. And so when he got in Nigeria, then he had the sudden sickness. Right. And unfortunately it occurred. But before we go, I wanted to mention the issue of survivors and stigmatization. We note very well that because of the number of persons that are surviving, before in March, April, and May of the disease, it was described that it was 90% case fatality rate, but now we're seeing 40%. Yeah, so there are a lot of persons surviving. For this, we formed a survivor network in Liberia that have a president of a physician assistant that survived the disease. And a lot of the physicians that are treating the Ebola patients have gained confidence to the extent that when they are releasing survivor, they embrace them, they dance with them, they show to the public that these people are cured of the virus and they are not dangerous to the population. So we're gaining a lot of confidence.
So Tolbert, these are other survivors welcoming other survivors, or members of the community who haven't had Ebola yet feeling comfortable with people who have, because that's a bit of a difference.
There was a radio show that was running this week called Survivors Talk, and on that radio show on a local radio station, the survivors are well informed to the extent that they are telling people, we cannot get the virus anymore. We've got it already. We've gained immunity, so we cannot get the virus. You should be worried. You haven't got the virus, but for us, we are safe now. So they're using that, and they are informed, and they love each other.
DeConte?
So I hear the survivors are celebrating that, but how's the rest of the public treating the survivors? Because as survivors, if they know that.
there is a stigma in the rest of the population. So we need to carry on that sensitization and tell them that these people have survived the disease already, the cure, and their rates is far lesser than those of others that have not caught the virus. And so that public education is really, really needed. And this is why we formed a network from the first place.
Well, DeConte, I want to shift gears just a little bit here and bring the community back in. But one of the things that we've seen banded around online and other places, at least here in the U.S., is talk of a travel ban. So we see things like this. This is a tweet. How about instead of giving a thermometer to passengers at 5 major airports, we prevent flights from West Africa? On the other hand, people that aren't in favor of this ban, like Eric says, I flew into Incheon in Korea on August 6th, and they have TICs, temperature indicator controllers, set up for all arriving international flights along with quarantine zones. That being said, he continues, I think we in the U.S. are behind in that aspect if we're just starting to set up those temperature indicator controllers now. So what are your thoughts on a proposed travel ban?
Yeah, well,
I
think the travel ban is a bad idea. I get the fear, though. I get the fear that drives that. And so I do understand that. Reason why I think it's a bad idea is that what happens to those people who have traveled there and now they can't come back and they're stuck? You know, we don't want that to happen. How about those millions of people who don't have Ebola, you know, that want to travel? So we do need to set up a better screening process, I believe, because obviously the one we have now doesn't work. It's flawed.
Sure. Talbot.
So, the only option for the global health community in international health is to go to the source of the disease and stop the outbreak. No amount of border closure, no amount of suspension of airline, no amount of ostracizing these countries, no amount of preventive measures at airports will stop the virus from going to any part of the world if you don't stop the virus from the countries that are affected right now. The reason is, based on the epidemiology of this disease, someone can be incubating, and it has proven itself with Patrick Sawyer's case, with Eric Duncan's case. So
so you'd basically have to keep, Talbot, just because I'm running out of time here in the show, basically have to keep everybody who is about to fly from any of the countries where you feel may have Ebola, you'd have to keep them in the airport for 21 days to quarantine them, wouldn't you, before they flew?
Yeah. Do that. That's the
only way. That's the only way. How can you do that?
Are you serious, DeConte? That's a seriously long travel plan.
And I just might get stones thrown at me right now for saying that.
What?
But
wow.
You know, because with Eric Duncan and with me living here in Minnesota, and I'm not saying, you know, there may be some better options, but I think that's a good option.
Oh my goodness, I can't believe I actually said that out loud and you thought that was a good idea. All right, there's something that...
You cannot keep people...
The reason for that is that my thing is, like, we need to be very deliberate on how we're fighting this disease. It's not normal times.
Yeah.
And so things may sound outrageous. Ebola is outrageous. So we may need to not quarantine them at the airport per se for 21 days, but monitor them somehow.
Sure.
There are people who are coming. I have friends of mine who came here from Liberia during the outbreak who self-quarantined themselves. Relatives of mine, one of my uncles flew in to New Jersey, and he called me and he said, I'm at home, but I'm staying at home for the next 21 days. That's the responsible thing to do.
Right.
Let's monitor those folks. Let's have people checking on them, but let's encourage them. Let's find a way that they can stay contained.
DeConte, let me ask this, because I know you're in touch with a lot of people who've either lost relatives who are Liberian, who's lost relatives back home, or know somebody who's died. So here's something that I've seen people talk about. If I have Ebola and I'm in Liberia, I'd rather have it in the US. Do you think people are deliberately getting on planes to get out of the situation and at least get to a US hospital that has facilities?
I have no idea. That is that's the possibility, and that's it's a scary thought to have Ebola traveling.
Right.
You know, people with Ebola traveling.
Talbot's nodding his head. Talbot, you don't think that's happening? Talbot?
Yeah, I have no idea what.
Yeah.
If it is happening, I have no idea. But basically, with the stringent measures at our airport and our seaports right now, if somebody is traveling, we will detect that if you were having the symptoms, because the infrared thermometer will show. Though it is not a test for Ebola, but we will take you off the line and do further investigation to test you what is going on. What are you having, rising temperature and all that.
All right,
But,
Tom, I want you to do something for our audience, which is very particular. Our team, who are from all over the world but haven't been to Liberia. I spent some time in Monrovia. They couldn't understand why Ebola wasn't contained yet. I think you kind of have to give them a very vivid picture of what maybe health systems are like in Liberia for them to understand it. In a minute, can you explain very in a vivid way why it's not contained, why Ebola is not contained? We spoke in July. It's been going on since March. Why is it not contained yet?
The first thing is you have to have a very good testing capacity for you to know whether you're dealing with Ebola or not. Liberia healthcare system did not have the sophistication of the kind of lab to have a test to know whether or not the person have Ebola.
Right.
Our infection prevention control measures are very, very poor here. So you find out that people go to facility and get infected. We don't have that strong public health system.
Yeah.
And also, this is a very strange disease to West Africa and in Liberia. So when it was in Guinea, we knew that Liberia would have been in a very serious problem. So the healthcare system wasn't strong at the time to deal with the situation. Sure. So we knew, and also entering an urban area, the strategy of quarantine people, contact tracing, we got overwhelmed because of the number of cases had overwhelmed the interventions that we have.
Oh my goodness, it's like the perfect storm,
now,
Talbot.
Right.
Yeah, we have.
So the system wasn't, the public health system wasn't prepared to deal with
That's
this.
a good explanation. DeConte, I'm going to wrap up with you because you, DeConte and Talbot, myself and Malika and our community, we could keep going for a couple of hours. There's so much to talk about. I'm going to begin to wrap things up. I'm so impressed by what you're doing, DeConte. You lost your husband. I'm going to show people what you're doing here with the Kofa Foundation. You're grieving. Your daughters are grieving. Why are you doing what you're doing?
Because people are still dying, and people are still dying from Ebola. And me staying at home and going through the normal, Liberian widow process does me no good, especially when thousands of people are dying still. And so I needed to take my time in grief, but then also direct my energy towards helping out so that other families don't have to go through what mine is going through.
Right.
As long as Ebola exists, as long as any infectious disease exists, I'm going to continue the fight to have it eradicated.
DeConte Kofa is the founder of the Kofa Foundation. She lost her husband to Ebola back in July. Talbot Nyenswa is Assistant Health Minister in Liberia. And Talbot, thank you so much for being part of this discussion. DeConte as well. Talbot, stay safe, stay well. Malika, where's our community leaving us?
I'll leave us with some two thoughts. One is from Coach Kings, who says the mistake was assuming this was an African problem and failing to recognize that it could and would spread outside the continent. So the solution, from someone else on Twitter, Kwaku, says a collective social responsibility and proper education.
I really could go on for the next hour. The control room is saying, no, you can't. Thank you very much to our guests, the community, for being part of this program. Meanwhile, on the next AJ stream, what would you say if I told you that pretty people earn more money or attractive people are thought to be better leaders? So Malika Bilal obviously earns way more than I do.
I like that.
Yeah. And she's saying no. She's not actually not denying that at all. Do you know what? It's a very weird thought, isn't it? That how you look might affect how people view you and your finances. But we will dig into that on Monday. Don't miss it. In the meantime, I'll see you online.